My brothers and I were 8, 7, and 4 years old when this happened. My youngest brother, who was 4 at the time, doesn't remember any of it, but my other brother and I do. We were on a family trip that scared my nan, pop, uncles, and parents more than I've ever seen them scared before or since. You might be wondering where the paranormal comes into this. Well, my brother, who was 7 at the time, and I both agreed that we weren't gone for more than an hour. We also both remember seeing our nan look straight at us and even wave. But she swore up until her death that she never saw us that day. First, let me give you some background. 4 times a year, our family would spend time at a cabin we own, which we call the castle. The castle sits at a man-made dam named Waingala in New South Wales, Australia. Growing up, my brothers and I had strict rules. We couldn't go past the valley at the bottom of the castle or past the hills that the castle sat between. The day this happened, we broke those rules. On this trip, we had our nan and pop, mom and dad, and our 2 uncles with us. At 5 a.m. on the day in question, my brothers and I were up, dressed and playing Bob the Builder cones and ladders. Nan complained about us waking her up and told us to go play, but to be back for breakfast at 7:30. Keep in mind this was 2004 in the middle of nowhere, Australia. The biggest dangers were kangaroos, snakes, and spiders. As the big sister, it was my job to watch over my little brothers and make sure we followed the rules. But for some reason, that day we thought it would be cool to walk past the valley and up the hill on the other side to watch the sunrise over the dam. Confidently, I decided we could watch the sunrise and be back in time for breakfast. If we stayed on the road that went over the valley, we could be seen from the castle at all times if someone looked for us. So off we went on our little adventure. This is where things get strange. Whether it was a glitch in the Matrix, a time slip, or something else entirely, I have no idea. We made it to the top of the hill, the sun was coming up, and everything was great. We were up there for no more than 10 minutes, and according to my wristwatch, it was about 6 a.m. So we set off back down the hill. We reached the valley and stopped to look into it for a minute. We could see the bottom clearly and decided, as most kids would, to venture down the valley and back up the other side. We had an hour and a half to kill, so surely it wouldn't take that long. We zigzagged to avoid thorn bushes, loose rocks, and spinifex, a spiky and painful grass, but tried to stay as straight as possible. When we reached the bottom of the valley, I checked the time again, and it was roughly 6:15 a.m. As we looked up the other side, we were surprised to see our nan standing on the edge of the valley, waving down at us. We thought we were going to get yelled at, but she just smiled and walked away. We figured we were in the clear. We started climbing back up, laughing and talking about whatever kids talk about, and finally made it out of the valley. Just as we stepped onto the road, Nan came running at us from the castle, screaming and demanding to know where we had been. I looked at my brothers and then back at her, too scared to speak. Nan pulled us into a hug and started crying, telling us we needed to get in the car to go find Pop, our parents, and our uncles because they were all out searching for us. We didn't say anything, we just followed her. It wasn't until we were all seated in the car that I spotted the time on the dash. It was 7 p.m. And rather than the sun rising, it was setting. I looked down at my watch, and it showed the same time. I remembered showing it to my 7-year-old brother, who was just as confused as I was. In February of last year, our Nan passed away unexpectedly. At her funeral, my dad asked if we remembered the day we disappeared. He even joked that if it had been him and our uncle, she wouldn't have cared. But because we were her precious grandkids, she was terrified. My youngest brother had no clue what we were talking about, but my other brother and I remembered. We told Dad what had happened from our point of view. He then filled us in on their side of the story, which had never been heard before. Apparently, Mom got up around 6:30 a.m. when she realized my brothers and I were being too quiet. She looked around the castle and in our little hideout. Think Fort Briars in Stranger Things. It was a similar rock and stick structure. She even called out to us, but there was no answer. She then woke everyone up to help search. Mom went to the ranger station to get their help, while Dad started walking the hills and Pop took to the 4-wheel drive tracks. My uncles offered to check the other cabins, their caravan park, and the boat shed. In reality, they went to get fish and chips in the caravan park and then to the next town over for ice cream and beer. They've since said that they knew we'd turn up, so they weren't worried. Nan stayed at the castle. Both Mom and Dad swear they looked in the valley and never saw us. Since last year, my brothers and even Dad have gone back to investigate the valley, and none of them can figure out how we could have been hidden from sight. Even if, by some chance, we were out of sight, we would have been heard. Our youngest brother said that even when our other brother was down in the valley, he could hear him clearly. Even if we were out of sight and out of hearing range, there's no way it should have taken us all day to walk back up the other side of the valley. We've walked it plenty of times since, and it's only taken us 30 minutes at most. And if it wasn't Nan who waved at us, who was it? Because it sure looked like her. Since being diagnosed with schizophrenia last year at the age of 18, I've been navigating the challenging and often frustrating process of finding the right treatment. It's been a journey marked by trial and error, as each new medication brings its own set of potential benefits and side effects. Some medications seem promising at first, but then fall short, while others might alleviate certain symptoms but introduce new challenges. It's a constant balancing act, working closely with my psychiatrist to adjust dosages and try different combinations. I understand this process requires patience and understanding, but overall, it's been difficult. I've had my share of auditory and visual hallucinations, been through psychosis, and even had to go to a psychiatric center twice, specifically the Kempsville Center for Behavioral Health. I've had voices telling me to hurt myself and others, visual hallucinations that related to my trauma or something entirely different. I could dive into everything if anyone cared, but I'll focus on my craziest hallucination. Keep in mind, I'm not very religious. I believe God exists, but I don't worship God. On July 13th, 2023, I was alone in my quiet, dimly lit room. I sat hunched over my computer screen, engrossed in one of my new favorite games, Resident Evil 4 Remake. The soft glow from the lamp behind me was the only source of light in the room. My breathing was steady, I felt calm and relaxed. The lamp's light cast my silhouette onto the wall in front of me, a shadow mirroring my seated position. On the wall was a cross, hung in the middle to hover above the ground. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. But then, in my line of sight, I noticed something that made my eyes jump. My shadow, which had mimicked my every move, began to shift independently. Slowly, it rose from a seated position to a standing one, as if it had a will of its own. My breath caught in my throat, and a cold sweat broke out across my skin. The room seemed to shrink around me, the familiar walls closing in as the impossible unfolded before my eyes. My mind raced, and I felt the unsettling grip of fear tightening around my chest. The vision appeared suddenly, overwhelming in its intensity. There, before my eyes, stood a figure that seemed both human and ethereal, radiating a blinding light that filled the space with an otherworldly glow. It was God, or at least, that was the horrifying perception. Its body was pale white, with skin and bones, like I was looking at a body with no muscles or flesh. Its skeleton was abnormal, the ribcage too enlarged for its body, with only pale skin sheeting its bones. The hands were big and long, with pitch black nails. It was tall. And then I examined its face last. It was horrifying, otherworldly, haunting. The teeth were painted white, its mouth dripping in this black saliva. The mouth itself was enlarged, almost like a forced smile. I searched more and saw those eyes, deep and unyielding. It looked at me as if it was looking directly into my soul. I felt unreal, as if every other emotion was drained from my body, and the only emotion I was holding onto was fear. It was like I couldn't move or produce a single sound from my vocal cords. I had never picked up a Bible, only gleaning bits and pieces of scriptures from various sources over the years. Yet, one verse had always stuck with me, Exodus 33, verse 20. He, God, said, "You cannot see my face, for man shall not see my face and live." As the horrifying visage of God appeared before me, those words echoed in my mind, and a chilling realization gripped me. The face was both majestic and terrifying, an ethereal presence that seemed to strip away the very essence of my being. I felt as though my soul was being wrenched from my body, the overwhelming fear that I was about to die tightening its hold on my heart. Every instinct screamed that this vision was a prelude to my end, and I was left paralyzed, unable to tear my eyes away from the divine and dreadful countenance that had invaded my reality. There was nothing and everything in those eyes. In my mind right now, I can picture those eyes. If I could draw, I'd show how frightening it really was. It felt as if time flew by while this was happening to me. Then, for a second, I finally moved and fell out of my chair. The cross that hung on the wall was in my hands. To this day, I don't remember yanking the cross or putting it in my hands. I have no memory of that. I looked back at the wall in front of me, and the being vanished out of my line of sight. The room circled back to normal, and my shadow was once again mimicking my movements. I began to question everything, my reality, my life, my mind. I curled up in a ball and started crying. I hoped it was just a nightmare, maybe the result of me passing out in my chair, or another hallucination due to my schizophrenia. I don't know. If you ask me now, part of me believes it was a hallucination. Another part of me believes it was real. That could be due to my delusional thinking, but I am not sure. All I know is that I had to move out of the house where I was staying, where my grandmother lived, and stay at my aunt's place. I will never crowd myself near anything related to it again. I will never look at the skies or the heavens the same way. I was so scared that I never discussed this with anyone around that time. I don't have any friends to talk about this with, and I don't communicate with anyone except for my mother and my psychiatrist. But yeah, that's it. I finally talked about this publicly. If anyone has any questions for me, or any coping mechanisms to deal with hallucinations, feel free to share them. I've always just frozen up and let these things happen. This story is 100% true. It might not have many details, but it's one of the most viscerally horrifying things that has ever happened to me. Back in 2016, I was in a long-term relationship with a girl whose family lived in a small town in Connecticut. We'd been dating for a little over a year, and I'd met her parents a few times. But this was our first time actually driving down and staying at her childhood home. I was already a little nervous about staying with her parents and making a good impression, but she assured me everything would be fine. The drive down was incredibly scenic, and the town itself had all the usual trappings of a quaint colonial town. We pulled up to a beautiful 3-story old house, half sitting on a hill overlooking a big green yard. Her parents greeted us warmly and led us into an open foyer with a dark wooden staircase. The house was clearly very old, but in a nice, cozy sort of way. It had been remodeled from one of those old school New England homes, with some slight modern touches. My ex said we'd be sleeping in the guest room upstairs because her childhood bedroom only had a narrow single bed. However, she made sure to mention that her house was sort of haunted, and the guest room was where most of the ghost activity had centered around. I asked her to clarify what that meant, and she said her brother had slept in the room a couple of times and weird stuff had happened while he was in there. She didn't elaborate much further, and I could tell she was trying to downplay it or avoid freaking me out. She did say, though, that pretty much everyone in her family had experienced something strange while living in the house. When her dad was remodeling the kitchen, he was home alone, working, and sat down to take a break. While sitting in silence, drinking some water, he suddenly felt a strong hand grip his right shoulder from behind. He jumped out of his chair and looked around, but no one was there. He's a completely normal, non-superstitious guy. When I asked him about it, he said he thought a spirit was trying to warn him not to make changes to the house. Another time, my ex was home alone with her dog, watching TV downstairs, when all of a sudden she heard loud footsteps walking down the hall upstairs. As the footsteps continued down the hall, she could swear she heard someone banging on the walls, slowly approaching the top of the staircase. Her dog ran to the bottom of the stairs and started barking like crazy. She grabbed her phone, grabbed the dog, seeing nothing at the top of the stairs, and ran outside. She called her parents and the police while watching the house from the sidewalk a little ways away. From where she was situated, she could see both entrances to the house and the way the windows were set up. You couldn't jump out of a second-story window without breaking your legs. The police searched the place and found no one, and her family chalked it up to a ghost. There had also been some smaller, spooky occurrences, like their attic door closing on its own, even if they put a chair in front of the door while they went up to get something. They would come back down the stairs to find the door closed. For some reason, that part bothered me the most, and I refused to go up there. Anyway, the actual experience I had was on my first night staying there. We were settling down to go to bed in the guest room, and I remember being slightly bothered by the lighting in the room. It just felt off or slightly uncanny. It was both very bright and dim at the same time. I figured I was just tired, and we climbed into bed and slowly nodded off to sleep. Now, I don't know if I was dreaming before this happened, but in the middle of the night, a woman appeared in my dreams. She was violently angry and started addressing me directly. She showed me people in my life that I loved, my ex, family, friends, and she started putting broken glass into their gums, scraping it against their teeth. I was just frozen in the dream, unable to react. She told me that she was going to torture and kill everyone I cared about. She promised me that everything she was saying was very real. I tried to wake up and was mentally struggling against whatever grip she had on me. For a second, I did wake up. I was in bed, sitting in the darkness. And then somehow the woman transmuted from the previous dream to this new one and screamed, "You will never escape." I woke up, for real this time, bolting upright, screaming and violently shaking. This woke my girlfriend, who immediately tried to calm me down, asking what was wrong. I started crying, trying to recount what had just happened and how viscerally real and messed up it was. She reassured me that it was just a dream, and I slowly started to calm down a little. I was genuinely afraid to go back to sleep, but we ended up somehow being able to nod off again, and I made it to morning without any further incident. We stayed at the house in that room a couple more times over the years after that, and I never had a dream like that again. You could probably chalk it up to the power of suggestion. Being in a new place, being told that the guest room had ghost activity, but that is the only time before or since that I've ever had a true night terror or woken up screaming. I never had a dream that even approaches the level of intensity of that one. Honestly, don't know what to make of it. It's probably just my brain freaking out, but as a first timer in that house, it felt like a warning. Thank you for watching, and that was 3 true scary Reddit stories. And if you found this video frightening, please make sure to smash that subscribe button and give the like button a frightening experience. Thanks again, and I will see you in the next video.